Welcome back everyone. In this third part of the tutorial, and hopefully the last part, we're going to continue on where we left off. Um, After the second part, I actually did some minor adjustment to our model, mainly removing and adding a different type of features. In the previous part, I think we had a few points here, also right underneath the eyes. I removed that one and replaced them with lines. For example, this line, and I think here is that line. And I think I also added that line. I'm not sure if that one was there in the beginning. I also added these lines on the cheeks because if you look at her photo, if I disable that, yeah. So if you look at her photo, it's quite dominant, so that's why I added those in, and these two lines obviously. So those are the lines that I added in. I removed the points that were there because then this area gets a bit too crowded. So with that out of the way, I can hide the layer again, turn back a layer. It looks to me just captures the facial expression of our subject a bit more, a bit better. If you look at it from afar, it just looks overall better in my opinion. In this part, we talked about we're going to include a boundary options for us, and then after that we're going to explore the export functions, or how we can export this into different formats that we can use. So let's start with the boundary. Same as the feature, we're going to make a new layer, just going to call it boundary. We're going to connect it to a pipeline geometry, and they are curves. So for this, we're going to turn off the mesh so we can see better. It's a bit tricky to do the boundary, but we'll do our best, especially because our hair is way too curly. Probably best idea to start from here where it's easy, then we can see where and how we're gonna go up from there. Like on this part it's quite straightforward, so that helps a bit. And this part is where we have to decide which of our hair strands that we want to include. I think I'm gonna take these, actually not too far, because I don't want to include the red. Go up here. This might be blue, so I'm gonna avoid the blue and continue on to the top of her head. There's a slight red there. It's probably from a tailgate light reflection. So we're gonna continue on down to this part, which I have to be careful. I think it might pick up a few brown color this part, but that's okay. That's totally fine. I'm gonna cut that off because that's way too much red. Cut this off, and I might see, as everything is brown, I might, you know what, let's include this and see how it goes. Like that. You don't have to be as precise as I am, but yeah, I just like to include a bit more. Since we're doing a full boundary, you might want to finish it off. I know that this part is a bit blurry, so just try to keep within the skin color tone, and then ended up with that. So the reason I drew this part out of boundaries, because unless you're doing a low poly of a subject that's in full frame, meaning full body, then obviously you don't need to go out of frame. Because mine goes out of frame, I need to make sure that whatever mesh is inside my boundary will be included. So I can also do it along the edge, which is fine, but just to be sure, I include it outside also, because in the next steps we're gonna make a feature for ourselves that enables us to toggle the background on and off. So with that done, I'm gonna switch that to the boundary so that it gets included in here. I'm gonna move this down because they're both lines. I can plug it back into this curve. So, but what I'm going to do first is actually connect these two into a curve component and then connect that curve component into the curves right there. Oh yeah, this might be a good time to explain. Well, I was hoping that you will get several branches. Then you will need to flatten this, but because if you look at it, our list might be better to go to a panel. Things are starting to lag a lot. As you can see, we don't have multiple branches, so we can just connect this here. If you do see multiple branches, I suggest you to flatten this part first. Otherwise, the discretization component will assume that you want to create two meshes, which we don't want. So just be on the lookout for that. You can also hide this, and I don't need to hide the background. So if you enable the mesh, you will see the division that we made, and this part right there, which is I think due to the hair and the red background. So this one's pretty okay. Now we separated it. We've added a definition line here that will separate our subject from previously from the background. If you want, you can disconnect it and see how it goes. But because it takes 3 seconds, I just let you experience that yourself. One way to do it is the next step is we want to physically select the mesh from the background. The way we're going to do that is we're going to be using a Boolean switch that will come just before the meshes get sent to the deconstruction and when the mesh centers are um, defined. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make a evaluate command. Actually, you know what? Let's explain the logic first. Maybe that will help understand this a bit. So if I turn on the mesh line, this is the mesh that's doing all the magic for us. And you can see this is the line that we defined. The line here, I think roughly there is the one that we defined. That's why you see all this weird triangulation here. The logic behind this, we're gonna use this center point of all these center points. We're gonna test that against our boundary, which of course is an enclosed curve. And the logic we're going to test is if that point exists within the boundary, then it stays. Otherwise, it gets deleted. And that's the main logic that we're going to use to separate our subject from the background. So with that said, let's code that in. I think we might need this one because we need the center points. And we need another component which tests this inclusion, and that's called pointing curve, this one, which is in curve analysis and pointing curve. This arrow is actually wrong. That's a bug. So we can include the points in the P because that's what it asks for. And then the boundary curve, not this one, but only the boundary curve. So we do that. What we get out of it is the P, which is the project point on the plane. We only have one plane, so that's useless to us. This is what we're interested in. A Boolean output, which tests actually not Boolean output, but actually more like a state output. And you can see we only have 2 zeros and 1s in this list because actually there's no 1s. And if you hover over this R output, you will see that on the top right underneath the relationship, it says 0 means outside, 1 means coincident, which we know will never exist because our boundary is the one that divides all these meshes. So there will be no points that sit on this boundary line. So that's why 1 will never exist. So we're only left with 0s and 2, inside or outside. That makes it easier for us. And we can use that information to cull, to delete certain faces. And the way we can do that is using this expression editor. We're going to use an if-else statement. For those of you familiar with programming, this should come in very familiar, and you'll feel probably right at home. For those you don't, just follow along and you'll be fine. What we're going to do is, let's say if x, as you can see, we have two variables, and those correspond these two inputs. So you can actually add more inputs if you want. If you zoom in, you can get the plus sign, you can add it, but we don't need those as many. So we're just going to use the x. So if you say x equals 0, so if x is outside, it will be culled, which means false. False means it will be deleted. True means it stays. And syntax error, left operand is null. We have no x, that's why it's an error. And once we plug in this one, it'll turn valid. Just a second, there we go. And all we get out of this is Boolean outputs. If I connect the panel, you can see everything's a bit slow actually. True and false. And we can use that in a calling pattern. For those who don't familiar, this is just a call, normal call pattern, that one, that takes in a list as data to call and a pattern, which we have here. And the ones we're going to call is the list of faces, and we can connect this. Wait a minute. Okay. It's going to be a problem if you connect this one straight into the P, and the reason for that being, you see this input, this line here is thick, and it's not dotted, not dashed, which means there are multiple data within a single tree running to this input. If we can plug it into a panel, what we will see is, actually the panel is the wrong one. Let's do a param viewer. I think this one, just to visualize the data trees that we have on the F. You see data with one branch, branch with this number of elements in it. And if you look at this one, what we see is this many branches with one item each. So we connect these two together. What Grasshopper will do is will multiply this amount of elements with each of these branches. So it will initially do 5,362 squared times. It will calculate that many times for this component, and that's going to take depending on your hardware, it might take a while. So we have to fix this before we plug it in. One way we can do this is we can flatten this output, right? We can right click on it and then F, flatten, not F, just flatten. You will see that everything becomes one branch. This will work, and I think if we connect this now, it should give us result in, there we go. So if you select it, you can always see in our viewport in Rhino that it's green. And if I turn on mesh lines, you can see that we selected the meshes that we actually want to select. From here, you can actually, let me see, since it takes from the F, and these are meshes, the L output, we can put that one there. And I believe the color will be very weird. Yeah, exactly. That's because it still thinks that we have color for the entire canvas, which we don't, of course. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna, I think it's called center. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna copy this one. we need to apply the same thing here. So we just copy that one and put these points here. Oh, crap. Oh wait, it's still branched, so that's fine. And there we have our, if we turn off that one, there we have our separation. Now, what if you want to go back? You want to include the full frame. What then? Do you have to delete all this and reconnect all that? Which you can do. Is actually just two connections, this to here and the C to the P, which means you ignore this. But then this will be an error because this will be either empty if you delete the boundary. If you don't delete it, then it retains the boundary, which then it's fine. But we're gonna make it easier for us. We're gonna make ourselves a toggle, and we're gonna expand the functionality of our function. If you look back here, I mentioned that we have this input that we only needed the X. But this time we can actually use the Y to make, in combination with a toggle, to sort of like give ourselves a switch that says, hey, do you want to include the background, yes or no? So if we go back here, we can see if X is 0, meaning if it's outside, then you call. But what if we say if it's outside, then you just take whatever Y input gives you. So if it's false, then it stays as is. But if it's true, then that will mean that if it's 0, then you will not call because it's true. And all the points that are not 0, which all the points are inside, will also be true. So it will not be called. So it doesn't matter what this evaluates, nothing will be called. That's basically what it means. So if I do this, remember we had it on false. So if I apply this, nothing should happen. And there we go. But if we turn this to true, we get our background back. So toggle that on and off. Pretty easy. We might want to rename this into maybe something like this, Include background, true, yes. False, no. Easy enough. Okay, so we have that settled. The next part we might want to tackle is, wow, time does go fast. I think we'll leave it at this one for now. The main takeaway of this part of the tutorial is basically the boundary that we created, so it allows us to separate the background, and this toggle that we made that enable us to include or not include the background, and the rest of the script we just adapt to that. So in the next video we're gonna focus on the export function. We're gonna work on the definition that's gonna be after this, after the final mesh that we have here. So I'll see you in the next video.